Hello and welcome. This is our monthly Meet the Expert webinar. I'm Angela Cripps, the MD of the Recruiting Gym, and our expert for this month is the wonderful Kate Coulson. Hello, Kate. How are you?
Hi, good morning. Oh, it's good. Oh no, it's still good morning. I'm really well, thank you. Very well. The sun is shining, so can't complain, can we?
I know. Woke up and it was really warm already. So hopefully wherever you are in the world, because we're in 90 different countries now, then it's lovely where you are. I must admit, we do appreciate a blue sky and a bit of sunshine. And it was the longest day yesterday. So the only issue with that means today's a little bit shorter, but it's a couple of months before we notice, isn't it? Let's get to what we're talking about today. Meet the Expert is half an hour of training, free training for the recruitment industry, so that we can share information with you, give you a topic of something that you need to be thinking about, really. And so your topic today is HR, because this is your background, isn't it? And you're going to introduce yourself and your background on there, but I just wanted to share how we met, because it was on LinkedIn, but the connection was Alex Moyle, the founder of the Recruiting Gym. If you just want to share how you know Alex.
Yeah, absolutely. Almost at the start of my career, Alex was the internal trainer at Robert Half. So he trained me up in recruitment and massively helped my success when I was in agency world.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to hear a little bit more about that. If you want to share your screen, I'm going to be dropping off and I will be here. I'll be on mute. If you have questions for Kate, please do put those into the chat. We've got 15 minutes at the end for Q&A, unless it's something really urgent and I need to unmute and dive in and ask her. But otherwise, we're going to get 25 minutes, half an hour of presentation on HR, your expert subject, and then we'll have the Q&A afterwards. So stick them in the chat. If you can hover over it and it will say ask us a question as well. We can make sure that we can time those and tick them off as we go through. Okay, are you sharing your screen?
I shall do that now. Hopefully that's worked.
There we go. Fabulous. I'm going to mute myself and I'll let you dive in, Kate. Away you go.
Super. Thank you so much. So welcome, everybody. Welcome to HR Fundamentals for a Recruitment Business today. I'm Kate Coulson and I am the founder and director of Kate Coulson HR Training. I've got over 20 years experience in HR and management positions, but my career started in recruitment. After 8 years in the agency world, I moved in-house for 7 years, and then I veered off into the world of contracting, and my last corporate role was as a HR operations manager for Kia, the large construction company. After a family sabbatical in Greece for 12 months, which I think is the most exciting thing on my LinkedIn profile, I set up my own business supporting small to medium-sized companies with all things people. Delighted to be here today. I hope you have some good takeaways from today's session, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have at the end. So it sounds awfully corporate, but what are our objectives for today? Why should you watch this? Why should you stick around? I want to share with you what HR is and why do recruitment businesses need HR. I'm going to share my top 6 sort of HR essentials for any small business. I'll ask you some rhetorical questions so you can decide if your HR provision is enough. And of course, as mentioned, there'll be plenty of time to ask me some questions at the end. So what is HR? Very good question. Human resources is actually a really key aspect of running any business. There are many areas of HR that you can see there on the slide. It can be outsourced, or indeed you can manage it internally. But I really urge that every business, no matter what size, has somebody focusing on HR. Even startups. That could be a director, could be just another senior member of the team, might be a dedicated HR manager, of course. It could be a consultant, you never know. Investing in all aspects of HR will ultimately drive your business performance. It reduces your risk and it's proven to increase your profits. I urge you that HR is not just employment law, nor is it all pink and fluffy and nice to have. It really is a crucial element of any business. So why do you need HR? And I'm sort of sorry to start with this slide really and think about the negatives, because this is almost where HR gets a bad reputation, because we wheel HR out to sort out a problem. And one of my aims today is to make you aware of how you can mitigate those risks and mitigate the problems that your business might face. One thing that always hits the headlines is the financial risk of not getting HR right and non-compliance. If a business isn't compliant with HR, the risk of this is you end up in an employee tribunal, and the average cost for employers in the UK of an employee tribunal is £8,500. Now, I know across the world that will be different, and employment law is different in every country. But don't just think of the financial risk of this, also think of the hassle of getting there. In the UK, if it's a claim for unfair dismissal, it is actually capped at just over £86,000. But if it's a discrimination claim, it's unlimited compensation. So it's not waters you want to be getting into. In the UK, if you employ an illegal worker, the fine could be up to £20,000. Now, if you're a perms consultant, you probably don't get involved with much right to work documentation. But of course, if you're a temps consultant, you do. But make sure if you're an if you're an employer yourself, you have right to work documentation on file, and you know that you're not at risk of that fine. And the final financial risk is the risk of turnover. So if you don't have happy staff and their well-being and their engagement isn't a priority to you, you really do risk that employee turnover. And a real ballpark figure there is that the estimated cost would be 1.5 to 2 times their salary, something that you need to really bear in mind. The other risk is the reputational risk, which clearly comes alongside the financial risk. But here's 3 companies that you probably have heard of. First of all is P&O, in the news in the UK very recently. They breached their, what's the word I'm looking for? They breached the employment code, they breached employment law. And when this happened, the negative press reached over 3.5 million people in the first 24 hours because of their HR and huge PR blunder. We've all heard of the Titanic, and yes, it hit an iceberg, so technically it sank. But why? It was because poor leadership, poor decision-making, poor accountability, and ultimately poor people practices. And the final huge reputational damage that I want to share with you today is Enron. It was a huge scandal in 2001, and if you're old enough like me, you do remember it. They had a reward system that encouraged really dangerous behaviours, and it easily overpowered the control systems in place that were there to prevent fraud and ethical breaches. It was a massive scandal in the press, and it was hugely damaging. So the final risk that I want to tell you about today is the turnover risk. I've already slightly mentioned it if you don't invest in HR. You're all well aware of the great resignation that's going on at the moment. Vacancies are at an all-time high, and unemployment, most recent figures, was almost at an all-time low at 4.1%. This in the UK is currently a fantastic business opportunity for recruiters. I appreciate that. It's a candidate-led market, so you need to attract, retain, and develop the very best recruiters out there to be able to optimise this current opportunity. So think, are you a diverse workplace? Why would someone want to work with you? Do you invest in your people? Does your team work really well together? Or are individuals performing well? Are your employees proud to work for you? And would they recommend you? Because you really don't want to be losing your top talent at the moment. There's a huge opportunity out there to grow very successful recruitment businesses. Invest in your people. So now you know what is HR and why do you need it. Let me share with you my 6 HR fundamentals for a recruitment business. Now, you mustn't laugh at this one. Of course, I'm starting with recruitment and onboarding for very, very important reasons. You may have heard the analogy that the doctor's child is always the sickest. And I think sometimes, in my experience, you are experts in recruitment, but make sure you follow through and put that expertise when you're recruiting your own staff. So let's start here with recruitment. It has three basic components. First of all, that's source and selection, which you are all experts at, then the offer, and finally the contract. Make sure you've got that recruitment strategy in place for your source and selection. It will be very different for how you do it for your clients. Make sure you're compliant with GDPR and you apply all of the good practices to your own recruitment agenda. Secondly, it's the offer. So do you collect all the necessary proof of work documentations? Do you take up references and how does that add value? Do you need any qualifications for your particular roles in your business? And do you check these? How do you check that they're valid? Is your offer competitive? So before you make that offer, have you got a competitive salary, bonus structure, employee benefits? Where's their place of work going to be? And what will their holiday entitlement look like? All of these need to be really thought out before you make that offer. They should be consistent across all of your employees, and they really should be market leading. And finally, there's the contract. So every employee must have a legally binding contract of employment. There are certain things that you must have legally in a contract, and you really want to consider what do you want to be contractually binding and what may you have in an additional letter, including an employee handbook, what's important to you. So 3 very, very important stages of recruitment to consider, and have you got them all right? The second part of this is onboarding. We all know that employee turnover in the first 6 months is high and that's costly and takes up an awful lot of your time. So my 3 top tips are: have some orientation documentation. Make sure you've got an induction checklist and you empower your employee to own that checklist as they go through. And have maybe a PowerPoint presentation or even a Word document, but something that shares with your new employee your vision, your values, who you are, where your business has come from, where it's going, some fundamentals for being on site. And that way you can lift and shift it for every employee and everybody gets the same welcome. My clients who have done this find it just simplifies the whole onboarding process, and it also makes it a really, really good process. Secondly, it's a buddy and a mentor. They are different. So a buddy is a peer, whereas a mentor would be somebody who's more senior, who's got more length of service. Share the load of this onboarding. And finally, it's a probation period. Make sure you manage the probation, regular reviews. Nothing should be a surprise. And don't forget that a probation is assumed passed if the employee is not informed otherwise on or before the date the probation ends. So whatever you do, if you're putting in a probation period, diarise that end date, because the day after that, if you've had no intervention, that employee is then a fully fledged employee. Moving on to number 2 is payroll. Obviously, it's fundamental. Majority of us go to work to earn money. So as an employer, how you are going to pay your employees is vital. So you want to think about how you're going to employ your employees and essentially how you're going to employ them. Will you employ them as employees or will they be contractors, and making sure that you're compliant in the UK with IR35? Will you be offering full-time hours, part-time hours, or even a 0 hours contract? That doesn't always need to be a controversial thing. Will you need to have timesheets to process a recording for hours for non-salaried staff? Don't leave it to chance. Make sure it's a formalised process so that it's not open for scrutiny or issues later down the line. It's absolutely not impossible to calculate your own payroll, but there's an awful lot to consider. So I would recommend you outsource your payroll. It can cost as little as £30 a month, and maybe your accountant would do it for you. Calculating PAYE is complex. You need to think about national insurance, income tax, pension contributions, benefits deducted from salaries, national minimum wage, maybe overtime, the calculations around a student loan. There's a lot to consider. And the other two things I would urge you to have if you have got employees are equal pay policy and performance-related pay. Having an equal pay policy avoids doubt. It reduces risk of you being unfair. It sets expectations, and it really is the right thing to do. It can be simple, but it will guide your business to avoid risks and to avoid having unequal pay. And performance-related pay. Think about and document how and when you'll review basic pay. What does your bonus structure look like? Is it contractual or non-contractual? And are you going to reward your employees on an annual basis, on a biannual basis, by giving them a pay rise? Is it a guaranteed pay rise? All these things should be considered all under performance-related pay. So moving on to my third fundamental, and that is workplace standards, which I pull down into two parts. The first is your employee handbook. Now, to be honest, you could call this a culture book. It could be an employee guide. It doesn't have to be a dry document that it potentially may have been years ago. However, it should involve some basics. So make sure in there you have got the employee basics. So what happens for if someone's absent, what's holiday entitlement, what's your registered office, some workplace policies, diversity, inclusion, parental leave, lone working, bribery and corruption is fairly prominent in the industry. Have a code of conduct. So what's acceptable at work? What's your dress code? How do you use technology, and maybe what behaviours are you looking for? Have something around compensation and development. So we talked about performance-related pay and maybe your pension. Have your benefits in here if they're non-contractual. So do you provide a company car, employee assistance program, and maybe salary sacrifice, like a cycle to work scheme? Also in here, you should have how an employee would resign. And what does it look like if you terminated their employment? So how would their pay be calculated? What's expected of them during their notice period? The other side of workplace standards is these policies. You can have policies in an employee handbook, a fairly shortened version. You might have some separately. If you employ more than 5 employees, you have it in the UK, you have a legal obligation to have a health and safety policy. You also, under the Employment Rights Act 1996, you are required to give your employees a specific procedure for disciplinaries and dismissal. Could be in your contract, it could be an employee handbook, it could be a separate policy. You must also have a grievance policy, and you are legally obliged to do so, but actually it also helps limit the risk for you, because if an employee has a grievance, they will know what to do internally rather than going externally for help straight away. The other policies that I really recommend as a basic for you, but you have no legal obligation, would be equal opportunities. The Equality Act of 2010 in the UK is really broad and impacts every facet of your business. Have a GDPR policy, so look at how you're managing personal data and what data protection looks like in your business. Have an attendance policy. It's really difficult to manage employees if you haven't set those expectations from day one. Set out your company ethics, what you're doing for the environment in an environmental policy. And finally, as I've mentioned, an equal pay policy. So that's our workplace standards, which it really doesn't matter if you are a startup, you have 1 or 2 employees, or up to hundreds. You really want to have these fundamentals in place. Moving on now to performance management. Now, I really don't want this to be a negative phrase, and I've called it many things in my career, but I think it says what it does on the tin, as long as you explain it to staff. This is a really, really simple wheel which shows what the performance management cycle should look like. And as an employer, you really should have this in place with documentation to support you. It starts at the top with planning. Plan your goals, set SMART goals, make sure you have a structure in place for these reviews, make sure that the goals are set are agreeable by all parties. So set the scene for the year ahead. Then have tools and systems to be able to track performance. That could be sales, it could be effort, it could be behaviours. How are you going to track and monitor that? Make sure you give regular feedback. I implore all of my clients to have a really simple one-to-one form and to have monthly one-to-ones with all staff. Have that regular check-in so you can give good and bad feedback and just quickly document it as you go. However, don't only hold back and give feedback once a month. Make it timely, give it in real time. It is so vital. And finally, it's that formal review. So it could be every 6 months or 12 months. Circle back on the goals that have been set, review it, and then you can pull back round to planning again for the year ahead. Having a really good performance management cycle with a clear policy, so everybody knows the process is, good documentation allows you as an employer to really optimise your staff's potential and should never be overlooked and should never be informal. My top 3 tips are: have a clear policy, document everything without tying yourselves up in knots with too much paperwork, and have that grievance policy. So if it all goes wrong, we know where we're going and we know how we're going to manage it. Moving on now to engagement. So a broad employee engagement strategy might focus on motivation. So that's how workers guide their efforts to achieve their goals. And that could be intrinsic, and that's how we enjoy work for its own sake, or extrinsic. So how a member of staff is motivated to do the job through reward. I know for a lot of recruiters, the earning potential in the industry is enough motivation. It's good motivation. But I know that not all agencies or in-house teams work the same. They don't all have the same bonus structure. And how will you keep your big biller or your big achiever from leaving and going to work from a competitor if that carrot is dangled? An engaged team is proven to be more productive, and you reduce that risk of turnover. So here are my top 10 things that employees want from work. Engagement is not just a fruit basket in the kitchen or pizza on a Friday lunchtime. I've worked with my clients to develop action plans under 5 pillars. So every avenue is covered and every aspect. The top 10 things are setting those clear expectations and goals, comes back to performance management. That recognition and praise comes into performance management, but should also be ad hoc. Really good two-way communication. Listening is just as important as sharing news. Employees want growth. They want to develop and have growth in them both personally and in their skills. Trust is massive. Employees need trust to get the job done. And hand in glove with that, they want responsibility and they want respect. Employees also want to take pride in their work. It's very, very rare that employees do anything to be slapdash. Employees want to be invested in, they want learning, and they always want to have that sense of achievement. So if you're thinking about, well, how do I get my team more engaged? It isn't just about taking them for drinks on a Friday, nor is it just about making sure you have regular team meetings. Engagement should be holistic. And as an employee, it's something that you really choose to do to yourself as well. So they have to bring themselves to the party to want to be engaged. And as an employer, you've got a real opportunity to grow your profits and drive productivity through some employee engagement initiatives. Now I'm moving on to training, and I can promise you that Angela hasn't paid me to say this. It's always in my top fundamentals. And I sort of chunk training down into 3 areas. So for yourselves in recruitment, think about the mandatory training that you must deliver. I would imagine that GDPR is probably top of your agenda. Think about the skills that you want to grow in your team so that they can develop more and get more from work. Customer service, maybe some basic accounting skills, could be the Microsoft packages, sales, objection handling, some really key skills that recruiters need. And finally, it is that development. So if you invest in your people, if they are growing, they will in turn invest in your business. Have you thought about first line manager training for your superstar who you know is going to take managing on of your team in the future? And you can really enrich your employees' work life with mental health awareness training, wellbeing workshops, and both of these are really known to reduce the risk of absence from work. So I always implore, don't think of the cost of training, think of the cost of not training, which you may well have heard before. So they are my top 6 fundamentals. And as promised, I'm going to ask you some rhetorical questions now. So you can reflect to think if your HR provision is enough for your business, maybe think what else you might need. So are you giving your people a world-class welcome, or are they leaving too soon? Are you set up to pay your employees correctly? Is there any risk there from compliance, or are you doing the best for your business or your employees? Have you got all those policies and procedures in place that your business needs to be compliant and are also that foundation for how you manage your staff, how you lead your staff, and how you ultimately grow your business? Are you confident that you're fair and consistent with all of your employees? If you've got that foundation, are your processes really following those policies? Is there any risk anywhere? Do you have that critical friend to support you when you've got a people issue? Very often when I work with my clients, their challenges or opportunities with their people are not black and white. There is employment law, there is guidance, there is case law. However, very often it's about understanding what's the right thing to do, what's the moral thing to do, and what are our opportunities. Have you got that critical friend to bounce ideas off and have those conversations? And finally, is your business a people business? Without your people, you are nothing. I will say that with confidence. So are you a people business? Are you focused on your best asset? So just to recap then, before we have plenty of time for some questions, my top 6 fundamentals, HR fundamentals for recruitment businesses, or indeed any small business, are recruitment and onboarding, payroll, your workplace standards, performance management, employee engagement, and training. Thank you. I love this curious owl. Any questions?
Thank you for that, Kate. If you want to stop sharing, we'll come back onto the screen. I'll do my video as well. Now, don't panic that there's not one comment in the chat. I've even tried to put into the chat that it's not working. You'll be glad to know it is working on the app.
I can see that Carol's commented, and he said that he didn't know that about probation. And I think that that's a real key thing, that, you know, probation will be assumed, which is lovely for the majority of employees if all is going well. But you don't want to be that employer day after the probation has expired, that you then have an employee on a month or 12 weeks notice, and the processes you need to follow are much more robust.
Right. So I take it from that you can see the chat.
I can, yes.
I can
okay.
now. because there's nothing on my screen. It's really weird. Yeah, no, that's what I was saying. So we had a laugh beforehand. I said, this has gone so technically perfect, setting you up and all the rest of it. There is going to be something, and it's the fact that the chat's not working on my screen. Okay, we're all good. We're all good. There was a couple of questions that came through elsewhere. So that, should a probation period ever be extended? Because we get this all the time in recruitment. Oh, you're nearly there. Let's give you another month, and I think you'll get there. I've got my views. I'd love to hear yours.
I think it really depends on the individual. I would say yes, if you think it's worth it, but I don't think any employer or employee should get to the date that a probation is going to be passed or expired and it be a shock as to what's about to happen. That's my biggest thing. If an employee walks into their probation review and it's thank you, but you need some more time, then that shouldn't be a shock. So if I was advising my client, should I extend a probation? Yes, if you think it's worth it. However, I would say in my experience of being a manager, very often, if you've got a 6-month probation, if that employee is not working out and meeting expectations by the 6-month mark, you probably want to be asking some more questions.
Yeah, that was always the bit that people should know going into their probation. They know exactly whether they've got the job confirmed or not, whether they've overachieved or just achieved. So having those minimum standards, so back to performance management. And to me, again, yes, it's managing the performance so that people can be the best that they can be. It's always about a positive. It's not your put on performance management because you're not achieving. No. It's every day, all the time. You're monitoring that performance, and people will know then when they hit the probation, well, I've overachieved on every area that you've set me because I know the expectations, I know the goals, and therefore, it's not a surprise. So, okay, so there is a potential then. So you're not saying a definite no, it's really on an individual case that
yes,
look at that one. And of course, market conditions as well. I mean, anyone that started just before the pandemic, you can't expect them to achieve what you'd set out. Maybe if they joined in the January, by April, obviously the world had changed, didn't it? Do it from there.
Absolutely.
Lovely to see the employment handbook in there as well. I think there's a lot of recruitment companies that don't have one, from my experience when I've been working with them. It's something that I've written as well. My last one was for the Church of Sweden. Slightly different, but there you go. What are the recent changes then that's happened, maybe because of this last couple of years that we've been through with regards to the employment handbook? What's the most recent stuff that needs to be put in there?
So a lot of it is pandemic, really. So it's looking at making sure, place of work. And a lot of my clients weren't considering hybrid working, didn't have lone working as a consideration, didn't have any guide around health and safety of working from home. So it's all that place of work and what expectations are. And a new element that I've seen putting into a lot of companies are putting in is that our ways of working. So it's that expectation of, well, if you're working from home, these are business hours, you must still take a lunch break or a reasonable break. And our expectations are that you are available for live chat on Microsoft Teams 24/7. And it is just, setting those expectations in a new way of working. And that, whereas an employee handbook is a real opportunity to get your policies in there. And some of them might be what you do if you're going to call in sick at 7:00 on a Monday morning and who do you ring? But I think it's a lot more holistic about setting expectations, our code of conduct, our morals, and how we work as a business, because the world is changing.
Yeah. I mean, keeping up to date with this stuff. This is obviously why we need people like you, because it does constantly change, doesn't it? And there are obviously new laws that come in that everyone needs to be aware of. But even just from a social point of view, how things can change from HR. Now, my experience is that a lot of recruitment companies don't have an dedicated HR person. they sort of have someone that sort of does the contracts or might do it from there. What would be the right size that you would recommend? If a company gets to this size, when should they have a dedicated HR person? And up until then, they can use you.
I think that really depends on the business and how it's made up. So I've got an employer who's got 40 employees, and I provide them HR support on a monthly basis. They're quite a large organisation, but internally they've got a really good structure, a sort of administration team structure, who can deal with the day-to-day, and then they use me as a consultant. But I would say, you would add real value to have a dedicated HR, internal HR, sort of 40 employees and above. However, you may want to pull in on expertise from consultants if you're looking at specific avenues. And the benefit of using a consultant is that I bring, or myself or any of my colleagues who do a similar thing, I bring experiences from external experiences. You can get quite blinkered if you're intern and been with one organisation for a while. But yeah, I would suggest you need somebody dedicated, sort of 40 employees and above. But that's going to change. It will also depend on your ambitions. So I work with startups to make sure they've got all the fundamentals in place and they've got one employee. That's fine. That startup could grow massively, and their ambitions could be that they'll have 20 employees within 12 months, and they want to grow through acquisition. So the dreaded 2P will come into play, in which case it's probably valuable they have that expertise on board sooner rather than later. But they could equally use a consultant as a much more cost-effective way of driving their HR. So I've probably given you a very politician answer there, but it's not one size fits all. It really depends on the business and the ambitions of the business.
I'm going to 2P. I just had shivers when you said that, because we had to transfer. I think it was 700 staff once on a contract. Can you just clarify? I know it's the transfer of what does it stand for? Transfer of undertakings or something? Transfer
of undertakings and professional services. I always get it wrong. It's an but basically, if a business is being sold and the employees, unless it's a sale, a share sale, and the employees are moving across, then 2P is the process that protects those employees to make sure that they are transferred correctly and safely, and they don't end up losing any employment rights. And it is a process to follow. Working in the construction world, we gained and lost contracts on a regular basis. So we had a dedicated 2P team who were making sure that all measures were met and was there. And I think, recruitment companies do grow through acquisition. It's a known thing. So make sure that happens.
Yeah, no, the contractors, because if you're supplying a contract and actually you lose that contract, but your temporary workers are employees of yours, so there are somewhere in that scenario, 2P applied. So even just two recruitment agencies sharing their contractors and passing them over, it happened there as well, and it was painful. I can remember. Doing it. So get some advice in relation to that. Let me just check the app. As I say, Renu's got great content, lots of useful reminders, but also to get the basics right in terms of people management. I noticed Charlotte dived in there and put our onboarding new starters course in there, because yes, I've been writing onboarding programs for about 15 years. So we have got one for a 360 recruitment consultant for their first 6 months. You'll be glad to know there's minimum expectations every week on all activities. There's a probation appraisal in there. So if you haven't got a good onboarding, then get that. If you need advice in any way, shape or form, you've got your LinkedIn profile there, the connections, so do grab that, or your company details as well. This will get downloaded, put into the Meet the Expert course, the green button at the bottom there. This is number 20. So we've been doing this for 20 months now. So there's 20 different topics for you to have a look at, and they're all in the course. And we'll put your slides and details in there as well, so that people can access those. Last call then, if there's any questions, let me just check. We put a poll in as well. I'd forgotten about that. Sorry. So you probably haven't got time to answer that now. Around what is the typical probation period? Because a lot of people that I've been working with have moved it from 3 to 6 months. Is that typical?
Yes, it is. And I think a lot of employers have a 6-month probation for safety. Because it does give you that safety net. I know that some really progressive employers don't have a probation period now. They rely on a really robust recruitment and selection process. My advice is to have a 6-month probation period. It is standard. Manage it well. It is, of course, an opportunity for the employee to check you out as well. But yeah, it is fairly industry and standard across the UK to have a 6-month probation period.
Yeah, I think 3 months, certainly for recruitment, is too short. It takes 3 months just to understand the job if you've not done it before, and then another 3 months for it all to work and to come together and for you to be achieving. So we need to be realistic with our expectations. It's 10 jobs in one, so let's give them 6 months to learn it and to work through. Thank you so much, Kate. Next month, we'll put it out here now. You're going to have a course in the recruiting gym.
I am.
For all our members, so look out for that. Will be out next month as well. We'll get you on Ask the Coach at some point in the second half of the year so that you can talk about that and share more of your knowledge, because it's fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed it. Take care.
Bye bye everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.